Good evening, and thank you for being here. I'm Dr. Betty Duke. I'm the Brody Professor of Public Policy here at the University of Maryland. It's my honor to welcome you to the second Brody Forum of 2018, Leadership and Civic Engagement, an Antidote to Divisiveness and Tribalism in Our Time. 22 years ago, Norman and Florence Brody endowed a public policy forum at the School of Public Policy here at the University of Maryland. The goal was to provide an in-depth discussion of major issues of the time. Over the decades, important speakers have come to the University of Maryland to address contemporary challenges. Speakers have included writers and academics, government officials, media experts, and members of deliberative bodies. Florence Brody was a University of Maryland alumna, class of 1947. And her husband, Norman, said he was an alum by marriage. Some of us know about those things. Norman passed away in 1996, and Florence left us on March 8th, the day of the first Brody Forum of 2018. Despite the fact that it was a very sad day, the family asked us to go on with the forum that night in honor of Florence. The topic of that evening was leadership in fraught times, responding to hate and bias. The subject was one that Florence would have supported with all of her heart and soul, because it carried forward her legacy of civility and optimism through education and dialogue. We are pleased tonight to have the next generation of the Brody family with us, their son Bill and his wife Susan, their daughter Sherry Bodner and her wife Bonnie, and representing the next generation, Deirdre Lipsikas. Please join me in thanking them for their steadfast support of this forum. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to lend the podium to President Wallace Lowe of the University of Maryland to set the stage for tonight's discussion. President Lowe.
Thank you, Professor Duke, for your leadership of the Brody Forum and your leadership in the School of Public Policy. Thank you all for coming to the Brody Forum this evening. And especially, again, let me thank the Brody family for being here, for your support of this important forum, bringing in distinguished persons to discuss issues of enormous contemporary importance. And of course, I welcome Mr. Thurgood Marshall, who will be introduced to you momentarily. I was asked to just say a few words to sort of set the stage for this conversation with Mr. Marshall and the Dean of our School of Public Policy, Bob Orr. I immigrated to this country at the age of 15 in the mid-60s. And when I came to this country, persons of color were about 10% of the population. And then you saw fast forward to about, the start of the 21st century. And then, so around the year 2000, persons of color and persons from various different backgrounds, different religions and so forth, were about 1/4 of the country. And then if you project it to 2050, the projections of demographers is that there will be no minorities in this country because we will all be minority. There has been a demographic revolution in this country. When I came here, America was a microcosm of Europe. Today, America is becoming a microcosm of the world, a universal nation, a nation of nations. And then what happens? What happens is there appears to be a counter-revolution. We are today about as divided and polarized as any time that I can remember. We are truly retreating into tribes, ideological tribes, social tribes, racial tribes, religious tribes. And when you are a member of a tribe, you no longer speak as an individual. You speak as a member of a tribe, of a group. It's groupthink. And as a result of this tribalism, the degree of division and polarization, the inability to view people with different backgrounds as rivals, as political antagonists. Instead, we view them as enemies. There is very little civility, very little ability to empathize, and the whole idea of democracy is to have that balance between having change and also having stability. So what I fear today, when I've been here now 7 years as president. Over the past year or so, when I go to bed every night, what I despair about is the future of American democracy. The struggle today is about the heart and soul of democracy. At a time when simultaneously there's the rise in a populist nationalism that's often, pretty bigoted, xenophobic. And then I ask myself, and this is not only in this country, it's around the world. And that is when I fear about democracy, and I ask myself, what is the role of a university in this world? Because the way I view it, democracy has two big components. One is what I call the hardware of democracy, the electoral process, and you know how foreign powers are trying to interfere with the hardware of this democracy. You also know that for many millennials, the fact that at the last presidential election, millennials who constitute about 1/3 of the population, less than 50% voted. We are undercutting the hardware ourselves. But there's also the software that drives the hardware, and that is basically the core values of this country that defines our national character. Respect for human dignity, of tolerance, of equality, of fairness, of freedom of expression. And not just those norms, but also the policies that flow from those norms. And just as importantly, the civic skills of how to argue, and argue without demonizing the other side. How to find compromise, because as Aristotle said, politics is the art of compromise. How to find the common ground without sacrificing the high ground. In other words, what is it? We are diverse. That diversity is a source of richness, but what's the social glue that keeps us together? I can only say that one vision was actually articulated way back in 1870, at a time of enormous polarization after the Civil War, by none other than Frederick Douglass, when he wrote about a composite nation. Composite being, of course, the word in those days for multicultural, multi-ethnic nation. He said, in this composite nation of ours, under law, there's no high, no low, no white, no black, but only a common country, a common citizenship, and a common destiny. That, for me, is true nationalism. It is a civic nationalism. It is an enlightened patriotism where he articulates a vision that despite all of our diversity, there are certain civic virtues that holds us together. Those civic virtues are the kinds of things that I don't know that we as a university, and for that matter, universities around the country, are fulfilling their mission. We do a fantastic job in preparing you, the students, to go out to have gainful employment. But are we sufficiently preparing you to go out to be responsible citizens who know how to live rightly in a free society? Because education is not only about educating the mind, it's about nurturing the heart and the spirit. And the heart and the spirit are those fundamental values that define us of compassion and dignity and tolerance. And they may be written in the Constitution, but they're not just legal values. They are civic virtues that tie our country together. And this is why we have this forum this evening. Is, as Mr. Marshall says in the title of his remarks, is developing civic engagement, American citizenship, is that the antidote to the rise of, let's say, an illiberal democracy around the world by leaders who, in my opinion, have neither heart nor soul? So let me just conclude by saying, I believe that being an American, and I myself am a proud, naturalized American, is not a spectator sport. Being an American is to be actively engaged in the life of the community, making a difference, helping others. That's why we have the Do Good initiative on this campus. But it also occurs to me, in order to go out and do good and make a difference, one must also be good. Be a good American citizen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Lowe. Our speaker tonight is Thurgood Marshall Jr., and our discussion will be facilitated by our own Dean of the School of Public Policy, Robert Orr. Thurgood Marshall Jr. is an attorney who provides guidance to clients in ethics, corporate governance, and in legislative and regulatory strategy. Mr. Marshall has served in all three branches of the federal government. In the executive branch, he served in several significant positions in the Clinton administration. He was assistant to the president and cabinet secretary. He was a member of the president's management council and the continuity in government team. He directed responses to national disasters and emergencies. He's the driving force in the federal government engagement in the Olympic and Paralympic Games in Salt Lake. He also served as Vice President Al Gore's Director of Legislative Affairs. In the Congress, he served on the Senate leadership staff. In addition, he was the counsel to the Senate Judiciary and Commerce, Science and Transportation, and Governmental Affairs committees. And he began his legal career in the judicial branch as a law clerk to a justice in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. In addition to all of that, he now serves on a number of boards and continues in a demanding corporate practice as well. His BA and law degrees are from the University of Virginia. Our own Dean Bob Orr will join Mr. Marshall in the discussion tonight. Bob previously served as the UN Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Strategic Planning. Prior to that, he was the Director of the Council on Foreign Relations and Executive Director of the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard's Kennedy School. He's also held a number of positions in the federal government, very senior positions. His bachelor's degree is from UCLA. His graduate degrees are from the Wilson School at Princeton. A grand evening lies ahead. Please join me in welcoming Thurgood Marshall Jr. and Bob Orr.
Yep. Do you have a preference? Okay.
Good evening and welcome. Thank you all for coming this evening. I will admit right up front that when I invited our distinguished guest tonight to come to give a speech, he thought about it for a moment, and I thought, maybe he's going to decline. And he said, on one condition, that it's a conversation, not a speech. So in the spirit of conversation, I will launch a couple questions to get us started, but then I think Mr. Marshall has said he really wants to engage with all of you in the audience. So be thinking of your questions, your concerns, because this will be a real conversation. So to get us started, conversation is personal, and I first met you when you were the head of cabinet affairs in the Clinton White House, and you were well known to build coalitions and bridges, especially on a lot of the tough issues that the president and his cabinet were facing. In these, what some have called tribalistic times, it seems like coalition building, bridge building is, if not a forgotten art, at least an often ignored art. What kind of advice would you give to our students and others who want to move our debate in civil ways? Are there secrets to coalition building and bridge building that you think a new generation needs to learn about?
Fair question. I'm not sure that there are secrets that I know and can divulge, but as someone who believes in building bridges, I was blessed to work for 3 senators who were very much bridge builders, folks who tried to pull opposites together. One was Senator Kennedy, who once said to me, he was trying to finish a meeting and didn't want to be rude to his next visitor, and he said, "Go schmaltz him." And I think many of you know what he meant was schmooze him, but there's an element of schmooze that is missing in leadership circles, particularly in Washington now. And each of the senators that I had the privilege of being able to work for understood, I think, what is so important to being successful in trying to reach across a divide. Senator Gore was the first senator for whom I had the chance to work. He was a freshman, but he had the benefit in many respects of a father who had served with a number of his colleagues and understood them and had engaged with them at various levels. I also worked for Senator Ernest Hollings, who was a senior member of the Democratic portion of the Senate, former governor of South Carolina, and Senator Kennedy, who I mentioned, was a senior New England liberal Democrat. So there's a range of folks on the spectrum, but they all understood that in order to get things done in the Senate, they had to be engaging and respectful of each of their 99 colleagues. They had to be active listeners. They had to seek them out, especially at times when they're not engaged in battle, and to understand and learn about each of their colleagues in ways that can be very personal, to understand what motivated them, to understand what they were trying to achieve with their careers, but also to understand what challenges they faced among their own voters, but to also understand the third rails in their world, so that when the time came to try to negotiate with them, there would be opportunities that could be offered. And I think part of that requires an element of courage, because you've got to be prepared in that sort of an engagement to share those same things about yourself, to be able to reveal what motivates you, what you need to thrive in the job. But the ability that each of them had and the tools were things that I benefited from and that I tried to use in that job. I think this notion of respect, Dr. Lowe, and engaging with people at the same level, with that level of respect, is essential to this kind of a process. And I'm reminded of a quote, being a lawyer, that Kingman Brewster had, which was that the notion that everybody is innocent until proven guilty should not be limited to the criminal court system, or indeed even to the legal system, but we should use that in every interaction with another human, that we ought to give them the benefit of the doubt. For people who, I find that because I tend to try to be looking for opportunities to match up with somebody, well, that's not a good choice of words, but opportunities
We know
to
what
find
you
common
mean.
ground with somebody that I have a number of friends who think that I'm a bit more of a softie and I'm more willing to look for a deal. So for those of you who may think that giving the benefit of the doubt to every single individual you meet, there is a recent, corollary that I recently came upon, and that is General Mattis's line, the Secretary of Defense, who said, you should respect every single person that you encounter, but you should also have a plan to kill him just in case. So I think there's a way to find some sort of roadmap.
That is an
to gain
important
common
secret to
ground.
coalition building. I think we have passed one on to a new generation. So if you just talked about respect, you talked about giving people the benefit of the doubt, that presumes that we have repeat interactions with people, that to build some level of trust to engage. Obviously, we have a whole new world for our students of social media where there's often not a lot of interpersonal engagement, or there's a less personal engagement than engagement over kind of the virtual world. How do you build respect and trust virtually, or can you?
I'm such a dinosaur that I think my inclination is to say that you just got to find a way to pull whoever you're engaging with into a more direct personal interaction or a group. And I know that is not as optimistic, given the current climate, as I would like things to be, but there are elements of personal interaction that we're depriving ourselves of with the use of the devices.
Yeah. So you are a lawyer. You've practiced law in many different chairs, many different kinds of law. And of course, your father is famous for many things, one of which is suing this university so that all students could have access to it. And I want to say for the record, we thank your father for suing us. But it makes me think about the role of the law today. Law schools are in big declines in attendance. The business model of the legal profession is changing. As a practitioner of law, as someone who has seen the use of the law in different spheres of society, what prospects for the law, and would you encourage our students today to go into legal professions?
I would. I'm a true believer in the law school process and the practice of law as a tool for all sorts of things, including social justice. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, that's a fairly easy question for me. But the future of the profession is a fascinating question, and they're clearly, just like most everything else in society now, artificial intelligence and all sorts of developments have brought rapid change to the profession. The thing that motivates me and keeps me optimistic about the future of the legal profession is the amazing and detailed array of complex issues that confront lawyers now and confront society, and they range from the front page to the back page of the paper. So it's everything from arcane insurance issues to front page insurance issues where, for example, autonomous automobiles are going to, and they are raising issues that have yet to be resolved. And their incidents are going to have to occur for that to play out. There are a number of issues in the corporate world with shareholder engagement and corporate compensation, executive compensation. There are, as is so often in the case in the United States, there are voting rights issues that are in play now, and gerrymandering and redistricting issues are coming up. So there's everything from the for-profit side of the legal world to the not-for-profit side. And actually on gerrymandering and redistricting, those issues are coming very quickly and in a big way in 2020 and 2021. And as you know, by and large, legal issues are not strictly the province of lawyers. So any number of those issues require input from experts, activists, and any number of people to allow them to percolate in the way that we want them to reach appropriate resolution. My personal preference on issues that the legal community needs to address are really overlap with the political process. I have worked on a lot of election law issues. Lately, I've been excited to be engaged with a group that is trying to look at ways to improve the way in which we select our elected officials, and also the way in which the parties select their nominees. So there are a number of controversial ideas that are on the table, but we're long overdue for that kind of a change. And just for a couple of examples, I have long believed that in terms of party nomination process, the use of the caucus system, while it brings a lot of interesting engagement and brings communities together to meet and make their decisions, it is inherently discriminatory toward any number of people. First of all, folks who have childcare needs or work obligations can't afford to engage in that process. And if you look, there are all sorts of other voids in the caucus process. So trying to tackle that would be one. One other example for the mathematicians and the statisticians in the room would be the notion of looking further into what a number of states have done, which is to allow for rank order voting. So you pick your first, second, and third choices. For me, that one has resonated because in the locations and jurisdictions where this has been attempted, there is far less negative advertising, which is part of what's fueling, I think, a lot of the discomfort and anger in American society now.
Well, we're talking about your discipline, but I hasten to add for students in the room, if you don't want to go to law school, you can go to public policy school and address all those issues. Right. So we can find some common ground here, and you could even go to the public health as well. So right. There are many disciplines through which you can attack these issues. We talk a lot about now all the sources of division in the country and the divisiveness, the polarization, and it's a long litany of adjectives you could use to describe our current discourse. What unites us as a country in 2018?
Well, I know I can't improve on Dr. Lowe's observation. The short answer for me is the two batches of very important ideals and structural components that have been time-honored in our society. The first are, I'm a rules-oriented, process-oriented person. The rule of law, the structure of the government that has been established for us, as imperfect as it was when the founders put it together, it was the best and remains the best structure for a democracy like ours. And to continue to work to improve it is fine, but I think to honor it and respect the rule of law is essential. But we share, I like to think that we share that core belief. We share a number of core beliefs, but the other piece of this, the other basket that gives me hope is precisely what Dr. Lowe addressed so eloquently, which is the fabric of our country has always recognized and honored the diversity of our cultures and our collective culture. And we have, in many respects, gained a competitive advantage around the globe by harnessing that strength And it's tragic to see aspects of our current society that try to tear at that, but it is that very fabric of diversity and the strength of diversity that gives me hope that many of the things that are dividing us unite us. And President Clinton was talking about problems in a different era in his first inaugural address, but he said there's nothing wrong about this country that can't be fixed by what is great about it. And those two baskets of interest that have always been there for us are what fit that bill for me.
I think it's a profound insight that diversity can be actually a source of unity, and it's one of the things that does set our country apart historically. It's not easy business, but it is possible. I'm just curious, in the room tonight, how many people speak at least 2 languages? See, that's a great number that immediately gives us access to parts of the world that otherwise we wouldn't have. I am struck that when we talk about diversity these days, it's almost, it becomes a conflictual discussion, and that somehow diversity brings problems with it, when in fact the history of this country is all about diversity has brought solutions. So we've got to find that balance again. Anything you would like to tell students these days about kind of surviving and thriving in this moment in our country? Because it is kind of a scary time. If this is your political baseline for what to expect from this country you live in, I can imagine it's a little bit traumatizing. Any advice for our students and those who are trying to navigate these waters?
Well, let me start by saying one thing I should have mentioned before, which it comes from the law school context, but it is really something I think that applies to students going through undergraduate programs and all graduate programs. My father's mentor, Dean Charles Hamilton Houston, in his welcoming remarks to the students at the law school, said that he expected to equip them with the tools to become A-plus lawyers, but also he expected them to use those tools for social good, to become social engineers and to engage in public policy where possible. And to me, that is translated, for example, with my own kids, but with students that I enjoy mentoring, to an effort to implore them to focus on excellence in developing the skills that they are pursuing with their studies, to put together that toolkit that they need to go forward, perfect those skills in a chosen profession or job, keep your eyes open for opportunities as they arise, but find a way to take those skills and offer them in service to the community when you have time. That is also something that I think is going to give you an opportunity to engage with people you might not normally come into contact with, which gets back to the first piece we were talking about coalition building and bridging divides. And if you talk about service in that way, to hone the tools that you are given to perfection, to use them in your profession as best you can, but also to find ways to donate them in meaningful places. I know that you're going to get great benefit from it, but so are we as a society, and we are frankly counting on you to do that. And we're coming up on an interesting anniversary. President Kennedy in 1963 called together the leading lawyers in the country and pretty much demanded that they commit to a certain percentage of their time for pro bono work. And that, in many respects, is why most any lawyer you will encounter understands that he or she has an obligation to provide some help in their communities by using what they've developed with their legal skills. I suspect there's going to be some efforts to remind people, because we're coming up literally on the 55th anniversary of that speech, and it is such an important part of the legal profession, but it translates, I think, across everybody who's had the opportunity to study in a program such as this one, where we have such high hopes for what you're doing now and what you're going to be able to do with the tools you're getting.
I did not know that it was President Kennedy who challenged the legal profession. I've often wondered that pro bono tradition, where did it come from? You know, it's interesting that maybe we all need to think about what does pro bono look like in our lives, whether we're lawyers or not. So it's time to bring other participants into the conversation. We have mics, so just ask that if you rise to ask a question, please be prepared to introduce yourself, and please try to make it a question, but if you want to make a comment too, we can start right down here in the middle. If right, microphone's on the way.
Hi, I'm Judith Barron. I am a junior here at the University of Maryland, and I'm in the School of Public Health. And Dean, I just have a question for you. And I'm not challenging you. I'm just curious as to what diversity you're talking about, because I work with underprivileged kids in Southeast DC, and I also am a coach for rowing, which is a very waspy sport. Yeah. And from what I've read and learned, our country has always fought against diversity by enslaving African Americans and then fighting integrating African Americans. We literally had to send armed people to allow a little girl to go to school. Nina, no Irish need apply. We persecuted Japanese people. So there have always been people who have loved the mixing of cultures in this country, but there's always been at least 50% that hated it and fought against it for a long time. So I'm just curious as to where you see the good in our history of our country.
I love the fact you're challenging what I said, but you did so in a respectful way.
Thank
That's
you.
exactly how it's done.
Thank you.
Look, I think the history of this country is highly problematic when it comes to immigration. Our anti-immigration kind of history is very troubling. Even the whole notion of a melting pot that we all learned in our civics classes years ago, a melting pot. We're melting others and turning them into us. You know, I think the metaphor of a mosaic, of the United States as a mosaic, that the whole really, pieces can be pieces, they can be identities, but together we're a much more beautiful composite. And I love the Frederick Douglass quote about a composite nation. So I don't mean to idealize it in any way, but I think that diversity, as it has evolved, we do learn to start to draw upon our strengths. It's not our first instinct, and I think I came to the public policy realm because I worked with refugees from Central America in the 1980s in California, and the bigotry and the hatred towards people that had fled their country in fear for their lives, and that our system could not even recognize them as refugees, so they had to live underground here. It was a searing experience for me, and it's what drove me to go into public policy. So I don't idealize it at all, but I think at the UN, I've worked for years in countries that have not achieved even close to the US's level of integrating people from different parts of the world. So while I don't idealize it, at the same time, I don't want to diminish what we've achieved by being a nation that, if the arms aren't always open, at least there have been ways to become an American by creed, not by birth. Sorry, please. Pardon? Absolutely. This is a conversation.
I suppose what my real question is we can change legislation, we can change law, but how do we fight de facto discrimination, right? Because that's still very prevalent, and I see it every day when I go to work.
I think I want to turn to our guest on that one. You see my public policy instincts here say when the really tough question comes, I'm going next door.
Well, the short answer is a convenient answer. You've got to call it out, but I recognize that there are times when that's difficult for people. But that's not to say that you shouldn't identify it when you see it, call it out if you can, or at least put it in the memory bank and find an opportunity to line up the right kind of interests to call attention to that sort of divisive behavior. I think it's, I understood your first question. I thought it was absolutely fair for both of us, but I think it's at times when people are being singled out for reasons that fit that category of inappropriate judgments that people are making, that we need to be most vigilant. And it's a little bit like the civil liberties quote, which is escaping me now, but when the country is at risk, that's when we need to be the most vigilant about civil rights and civil liberties. When individuals are being discriminated against or being treated inappropriately because of their ethnicity, their background, gender, choice, that in itself is a signal that somebody's off. And by and large, there are elements of their background that either they are in denial about or they are unaware of, that they, at some point in their history or their family line, were likely subjected to the same thing.
Please. Okay, we'll come to two over here, one in back and one in front. Whoever gets the mic first gets to go first.
Actually, I may not, do I need this? Do I have to?
Yeah,
I want to
please,
thank
Ian.
Bob for handing that last question over. I really appreciated that. It was very thoughtful.
Whatever
It
you
was
ask,
tough,
it's
though.
going to
It was
him.
tough.
Well, actually, it's to both of you. And first of all, thank you again, Thurgood Marshall Jr. for being here. Thank you, Dean Orr, for conducting this Q&A. The main thing I wanted to give is a question I have two, but the first one's more so, not exactly a follow-up to, what's your name again, ma'am? Judith? More so maybe a emphasis on the acknowledgement of trying to get people who may have this fearful rhetoric of saying something, doing something about whether it's discrimination on race or sexual assault. Because with me working in the legal system, that's what I get sometimes more so people afraid to say something regarding sexual allegations or just anything regarding dehumanizing someone because they're thinking, how will this affect me if I say something? How is this going to affect my conditions with the job or wherever I'm located where I saw this? And how is this going to affect me in terms of how the media is going to continuously cover me? Because if I speak, therefore it won't end in terms of my involvement in this situation. So my first question is more so to that. What would you suggest to someone who is having that perspective of, okay, if I say something, here are these chain reactions that could happen, whether positive or negative, is still something that's out of my control, according to their perspective. So what would you say for that, for both of you?
I think you owe it to me to start us on this one.
Okay, I think you asked very much about kind of personally, but I want to pull back for a second. And I lived through something that really seared into me that we owe it to ourselves and our communities to have honest discussions. I lived in East Africa at a time when the AIDS epidemic was wiping entire parts of the population out. But we weren't supposed to talk about it because it would be bad for business, bad for tourism. Stay with me, for it sounds like I'm pretty far afield. But I remember feeling that, you know, people won't come to East Africa because AIDS is wiping people out. If we have an honest conversation about it, wouldn't they give people more confidence that this is a place that they could go because the issues are being dealt with instead of tucked away and rampaging through the society? You know, on this campus today, it's hard for every individual to raise issues of sexual violence and discrimination of many forms. But I will tell you, we're a healthier community when people do raise it and we talk about it. And I think it makes us a more attractive place to come if we're dealing with our issues, if we're talking about them, if we're having sincere discussions. It doesn't make it any easier on a personal level. I think you're right, that the minute you launch a question, people start going, I wonder why, you know, he said that. I will tell you, being a dean, I feel one of my jobs for my school is to try to create an environment where everyone not only feels it's okay to ask tough questions and to challenge each other on these tough issues, but that it's actually expected, that it's part of building ourselves up as a community. Easier said than done, but you know, we went through a diversity training the other day, and the facilitator asked us all what our pronouns were. And I saw some of my faculty members turn to each other and say, did he say pronoun? What's this pronoun thing? So, you know, these are, you know, it's not, there are various kinds of conversations that are hard to start having, but we owe it to each other to create an environment where we can do that. It does open us up to risk, but I think we have to take some risks or we're not going to make progress on these issues. I will say that I feel like the community here on campus, and it's one reason I came back to academia and why I came to this campus, we have real public in this public institution. We have people from all backgrounds. We have all the issues of society pouring through our doors every day. If we can come to some solutions here on this campus, they're immediately translatable out into the rest of the world too. So I hope that you will continue to risk and that others will continue to risk saying and asking and challenging, but doing it in a respectful way. I think you started us off nicely. You were very gentle with me, actually, but you know, I think we do owe it to have these real conversations, because, you know, just because this is Thurgood Marshall Jr. and I'm a dean, yeah, well, those are two opinions. I would love to have some different opinions here.
Don't
Okay,
forget,
I went
Juna
first.
may also have a Mattis plan for you. She may also, just might.
I'm tucking away that strategy in my back pocket.
There was great restraint and respect shown. So two small aspects of a response. I would not overlook the opportunities that technology offer to deal with situations like that. So you should not, if you feel you're going to be at risk, you should not, I believe you should not put yourself at risk. There are too many tragic outcomes that have come from that. For all the heroic stories that I know I greatly respect, it breaks my heart to think of the times when people have done that and paid a price that is just absolutely uncalled for. The other way that technology, well, one way that the technology helps is with voting rights and human rights abuses. In my work with the Ford Foundation, one of the groups that with whom we work, a grantee called Witness, has provided people with the equipment to monitor and track human rights abuses in some very difficult places around the globe. The amazing thing with the internet now is that these people don't have to document these abuses on paper and somehow get out of the country safely before they are revealed. They can surreptitiously film these, and the minute they can get them up to the satellite, they're actually somewhat protected. So there are different ways in which technology can help in some of these kinds of instances. Another is that you can use the tool to find like-minded organizations and try to apply that sort of a misdeed as a motivation to help prevent it from occurring in other places. One of the things that I'm committed to through the Ford Foundation is an effort to attack inequality on a more comprehensive level, to identify all the aspects in our society that are either creating or expanding inequality in society, primarily in the United States, but around the world, whether it's government processes or even just the way in which we think in the for-profit and nonprofit world, trying to focus on short-term delivery of profits and at the expense of any number of other initiatives and goals, broken social contracts, actually laws that are still in the books that have discriminatory effect, that create and exaggerate inequalities. There are ways to use the net to find like-minded groups that can help you maybe not rectify a situation that one might have been exposed to, but to try to use that as a learning moment to motivate oneself to go fix it as best we can.
I think it's interesting that I'm going to amend my response to match yours a little bit. It's great to be heroic and be bold sometimes, but there are risks for different people, the risks are higher, unfortunately. And so being smart and not taking risks that are either unnecessary or maybe not the right calculated, I think, shows that the color of your skin and the religion you practice, some people are a little more insulated, and so I take the friendly amendment that that you offer. That take risks, yes, but smart risks, calculated risks, because that's how we move things forward. But we don't want to lose all of our great people in taking risks that can have high costs, not just in other countries, in this country. Thank you.
Actually, a second question, if you don't mind.
Oh, please.
So the second one's very short. It's basically to your bridge analogy. I was thinking more so to both of you. At this point, because of how we're all in our different ideologies in terms of race, politics, religion, but in terms of building that bridge and welcoming people in, what is, you think, the most effective, or one of the most effective ways to even try to do that more so for people, where you sit there and say to yourself, what do you agree on with someone that could be entirely the opposite of you in terms of certain things that are very personal to you, but you have to put what I call your ego in the trash can. You have to put your ego in the trash can, and you need to say to yourself, how do I find out what we agree on? And then the stuff we don't agree on, that's something much later, but it's not the priority. So for both of you, what would be the method or one of the methods to have us look for what we can agree on rather than what we continuously disagree on?
I'm going to go first on this one. Put your ego in the trash can. There's another proven strategy. So in addition to the Mattis strategy, it's a nice metaphor for if you're going to build a bridge, if it's about you, you're not bridging to anywhere. So you do have to kind of check your ego at the door or put it in the trash can if you're going to build a real bridge. And I will tell you, there were some counter protesters at the march that the students from Parkland had here in DC, and my instincts were not to build bridges with these folks. But this wasn't about me or my response to them to engage with them in a respectful way that would say, I fundamentally disagree with what you are saying, but you have a right to that opinion, and even here in the streets of DC on this day of all days with these kids leading us, I'm willing to have a conversation. That was very hard for me to do. My ego wasn't going to the trash can. I was, flashing it right up here, but my kids standing there, I was thinking about what are they going to take away from this if I get all in someone's face over this. And so maybe another strategy, in addition to putting your ego in the trash can, is imagine your kids, your grandmother, your loved one is standing next to you, even if they're not. Bring your better self to the table on these issues when you're trying to build bridges across some pretty big chasms.
Yeah, I think if you, I'm not sure I'm reading into your question the option to do this, but it's always going to be easier to try to bridge that if you're not engaged in a negotiation, a battle, or something. If there is an opportunity to get together and exchange views and backgrounds and interests, education background, et cetera, or areas of study, I think, I know that makes a huge difference in my world. I had a trip recently with a baseball team that I work with. It's a college team in the DC area, and it's a summer league, and they're D1 players. And we had a series of games on the road, and one of the other folks involved with the team said, "Well, oh gosh, one of the kids is just blowing up the dugout," and the team cohesion issue was a problem, and it was about political issues. And sure enough, that night was my chance to have this young man zero in on me. And I thought, well, my politics are pretty clear, so this is probably not going to be a very pleasant evening. And we ended up, we had this wonderful chat about baseball, and my colleague Denise Sue, who is here, Alex Deese, we are about as far apart ideologically on the political spectrum as can be, but we have regular visits to talk about Supreme Court arguments, many of which we have no common view on, but it's fun to discuss these things, and he's a pre-law student. We'll engage in sports, but there gets to be a point where we back into political discussions and public policy discussions, and having come at it the hard way, through the long way, it's a much more of an even and balanced discussion, and I think the level of respect is there that's appropriate for both of us. Now, that's a luxury that not everyone has. I'm not sure the people in Charlottesville who were screaming across the barricade were ever going to have a moment, an aha type moment. But the optimist in me says that there were people there who, under different circumstances, might have been able to find a way to talk through some of what was going on there. But not on the battlefield with the cameras going and the screaming and the throwing of objects and things.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we had one back here who's been very patient. I'm sorry, it's hard to see past the lights here. Still not on.
Hi, okay.
Much better.
Hi, my name is Josiah Bedford. I'm a bioengineer major as well as an African American Studies minor. And my question is, in today's current political climate, especially on the tail end of our first black presidency, there's a lot of individuals out there who see color blindness as the best solution for divisiveness and tribalism in our country. How might you go about combating that belief, especially since race and racism still plays is still a very prevalent issue in our society? How do you explain to them that, no, you can't say race isn't there, you say you can't see racism because that only adds to the problem?
Well, I'm not sure, I've never been sure I understood the notion of color blindness. I know I have the general sense in the Dr. King sense, but my understanding, even in that sense, is that there is at all times an awareness, in a positive sense, of what everybody's bringing to the table, and an awareness that a lot of that is the commonality of the life experience, but a lot of it is individual cultural backgrounds. So I'm a skeptic. I'm having a little trouble articulating an answer. I respect the question, I understand it, and I think it's a good question. But I'm afraid that's as good as I can do. Sorry.
Here, and then I think you had one back here. It's harder to see further back. So you have the microphone there. Why don't we go there, and then, okay. And then next after this.
Oh, first.
Please.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. Boris Lushniak, the Dean of the School of Public Health, the other public's partner here. Also former Fed for 27 years of service. And I just want to reflect on something both that Dr. Lowe brought up in terms of tribalism, how we're sort of, getting into perhaps that stage of our nation's history. But going back in time and what you've done and what you've seen in terms of your government service, and in particular, a term that we used to use pretty often to describe sort of leadership, perhaps at its best, and it's a term that comes with a gender specification, but it's a term statesman. And we can say statesperson, stateswoman, however you want to look at it. But we used to say that, our government used to function because we used to have statesmen in that position. The question to you is, do statesmen still exist? And is statesmanship something that is nature or nurture? I.e., we are now in the world of academia. Bob in the world of public policy, I in public health. Our goal in the publics is to be able to train the next generation of leaders, ethical leaders, those that are there to serve the public in terms of the publics and the public's mission. So the question really is, does statesmanship exist, and is statesmanship teachable?
Well, I think, I sure hope it does. And I think a starting point is an easy read. It's Profiles in Courage, and that's just one of a number of sources for guidance. I think we can agree on a handful of people in high elective office right now who are flirting with that, and not flirting in the sense that they're thinking about it, but that they have stepped up and, at political risk to themselves, called out things that they think are inappropriate in our political leaders, inappropriate in leaders in their own party. And I think that is part of what I regard as a component of statesmanship. But I also think that, unfortunately, we are missing the sort of statesmanship that we have come to expect over a couple of hundred years, where we have a group of political leaders who, having identified goals and objectives, can find a way to not only achieve them, but bring the country along to understand, if not completely support, what those goals have as a desired outcome for us. And so while I believe that there are a number of additional individuals who have that profile, I would very much like to see more of them step forward. I do think that can be nurtured by pulling out so many courageous examples from our history. And I find inspiration in those for a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with me trying to aspire to become a statesperson, because I'm not going to be running for anything or running anything. But I just find that those stories are just inspiring for many reasons.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Zori Firon. I'm a freshman communications and government and politics double major, and my question is kind of a three-parter. So the first part is, how do you think students should go about having conversations with their peers about major social issues and find similarities, and particularly in a relaxed setting? And then also if your peers are of different backgrounds or if they're completely different than you.
I think, my personal preference is to set up an environment for discussion where there are opportunities for individuals to get a sense of each other before you get to the kind of the crux of the discussion. There's a reason people can come together and everyone can understand that that's where they're headed. And if they want to manipulate the process a little bit by describing their backgrounds and what motivates them in a way that tilts the discussion, so be it. But I think if there's an honest sort of table setting of who's at the table and what they're bringing to the table, the fact that they've come to the table is in itself encouraging. And I think it's important to continue in a discussion along those lines with a level of respect and empathy that allows everyone to air out their views. And if you can't quite reach a conclusion to the discussion, that's probably a welcome outcome, because then you're welcome to come back. Right? If that's too simplistic, I'm sorry, but I'm optimistic that people can do that.
Well, I love the fact that you're a freshman and asking that question, because freshman year, as challenging and stressful as it might be, most freshmen are coming to this campus and meeting people that are from very different communities, many people for the first time. And to go back to give them the benefit of the doubt, you have to stretch yourself a little bit. And I think freshman year is a fantastic opportunity, and college writ large is a fantastic opportunity to engage with people from different backgrounds. To this day, some of my best friends who come from very different backgrounds from me, I met in college. And it was that opening of what a university experience can be. So you're doing the right thing as a freshman, diving into this with both feet.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Malik Nickerson, Morehouse College grad and applicant to the School of Public Policy. And
did I hear applicant? Oh, I like that. I like that. He's in. No.
So we're talking about antidotes for divisive times, and it's already been acknowledged that there are de facto structures that keep people separated, both socially and economically. For instance, as a lawyer, depending on how you practice and what you practice, your income will likely grant you more economic opportunities than, say, a grocery store clerk. Your kids might go to different schools, you go live in different neighborhoods, and so on. And I'm not trying to bash lawyers. For the record, I want to go to law school for my terminal degree. But my question is for Mr. Marshall, and my question is, in your experience as an attorney and as an attorney who's had many different roles, which one of your roles have you felt most fulfilled in terms of achieving long-term, systematic social justice, making positive ideological bridges, et cetera?
That's a great question. All these questions have been wonderful. It's unfortunately a tough question for me because I've been blessed with opportunities that have allowed me to do things where I've been able to contribute in ways that I always hoped I would. So when I was practicing law and engaging in corporate litigation as a junior associate, for me, learning how a business worked was a tool that I felt was going to serve me well throughout my career. And young lawyers in those days always felt that it was drudgery work. But the reality is I think most of us were fascinated by it. So even when we were pining away sometimes, the tools that we can pick up from those things can be very useful throughout our careers. So if I had to pick, I would, I certainly enjoyed working at the White House because of the opportunity to engage with particularly the superstar career employees in the federal government who are doing amazing things over their entire careers. And for a political appointee, we were political appointees. For a political appointee to be able to come in and try to help to shine a spotlight on someone's work in an agency and help them to get the kind of credit and exposure for their ideas and their focus, and maybe even steal a little of that credit for the boss, is a really special opportunity to be able to see the agencies deliver on the various things that they can deliver on, and to be able to help them do that in a town where a lot of people sometimes denigrate the federal bureaucracy was something that was a wonderful opportunity for me. Being associated with the Ford Foundation, I am not a full-time employee there, I'm on their board, but the work of the Ford Foundation and to be able to engage with the remarkable talent at that place and to learn from them is just, I mean, it's like a fire hose of fulfillment. So I feel as if when I'm working on my board responsibilities with Ford, then I'm picking up a graduate degree at every meeting. It's just, it's sort of, it's an embarrassment of riches, and I like to think I've not only, I know I've tried to take full advantage of these opportunities, but I like to think I've been able to bring some positive benefit to them as well. But I really hate to single out anything. I'm blessed with wonderful colleagues in my current job at a law firm, and if that might be your terminal degree, terminal has different meanings. So I hope you'll come here for the public policy
we'll
training.
Just have a couple more, one here, and then we'll have to wrap it up.
Hi, my name is Angela Sims, and I'm a sociologist, actually trying to become a sociologist. I'm working on my dissertation at University of Pennsylvania. My research site is in Prince George's County. And my question is related to the other big institution that I think works alongside democracy, which is capitalism in the market. And so I'm wondering if you could speak about the Constitution and the idea of property rights really being sort of fundamental to the role of the legal system and protecting the capacity of markets to function, to the point that if we go back to our founding, a lot of the compromises made in the Constitution had to do with slavery, which had to do with the basic foundation of wealth that this country had. And moving forward, we can see a number of different ways in which the markets and the democracy are really in conversation with each other. And to me, this is important for divisiveness because the class structure really, in many ways, creates the capacity that you have to really engage the democratic process. And so I'm wondering if, as we see increasing inequality in this country, I think you mentioned, for example, that you can't go to a caucus if you don't have childcare, where we also know that many people can work 3 jobs and not feed their family. So I'm wondering how we think about democracy alongside our material conditions and what it means when people can't meet their basic needs, and yet we have extraordinary opulence among a few, and what that does to our capacity to have an honest conversation about what it means to be a citizen with full social, political, and economic rights.
Well,
You're not becoming a sociologist, you're already there.
Well, I did touch on one very small piece of that challenge, which is efforts that are underway that have been giving voice, or actually more, gaining momentum to deal with the corporate compensation question in the executive suites. One small issue, but the fact that that's being taken on, I think is a relatively good sign in terms of that piece of that puzzle. I don't know that it's easily solved, however. I think the number I was told was that J.P. Morgan, when he was running his bank, and he did pretty well, his rule of thumb was that the CEO should not make like 17x whatever the mean was among the rest of the employees, and the number now is just astronomical. And if 17x is roughly okay, then we're clearly not going to get back to that. But if people are pointing this out and exposing folks who are taking advantage of that, the more that is called out, the more that's publicized, the more that sort of gross inequality starts to make things clear, at least in a way that gives people more voice and more tools to attack it. But the broader inequality issues are the same mix, and I think that challenging that structure in any way that individuals can is a solution for many of the ills that are confronting us. And I mentioned a couple, which include the focus on short-term, which I think could be balanced off. I don't believe it should be totally ignored, but the social contracts that have been long fought over to obtain, that are just either ignored or just honored kind of in the breach, is something that needs to be attacked and is being attacked, and there are groups doing that. And there are efforts to deal with the lower end of the wage scale, which is harder, but the last campaign, I think, started to make inroads on that. So any number of things have to be done, but it's clearly a much broader challenge than a quick solution is going to be able to provide for us.
Okay, one last question down in front here.
Hi, my name is Brody. I'm a freshman, and I'm in the comp sci school. I'm a comp sci major, and so I was like wondering about the divisive and tribal times. So for I've been an immigrant here for America for like about 12, 13 years so far, and I just got my green card recently. So most of my time I've seen America through a third person perspective. Someone said it's not a perspective sport, but that's how it's been for most of my life. I've been seeing America in a more as a show or something, where I see everything going up. I can't technically participate or say anything. And what I've noticed so far, and because I love history, so I like looking back at history, and when I look at now in history, I always notice that America is really good, or America flourishes when we are fighting. So and it's usually when we're usually unified on a topic, I realize that we often get into trouble, or we have to make bad decisions. So I guess I was trying to say whether maybe it's because I'm naive, or maybe because I don't know, maybe it's because I'm not putting everything together. But why should we be more focused about the problem of diverse and tribalistic times now? Because if it's in the past, if it's been always if it's given us positive results, then shouldn't we most likely believe that always it will give us a positive result in the near future, or maybe not in the near future, but in the future?
Well, if I'm following, the issue I have is that while I believe that it is and has been the strength and the fabric of our country, that there is something clearly going on where there are individuals who are seizing upon this in a way to sort of fuel the flames of divisiveness and to single people out and try to splinter what we have.
And if I could just add one point, that I think the word tribalistic, tribes aren't bad. We all come from somewhere. We have groups, that we have identities. Those can be very powerful, positive forces. Tribalism, though, just like nationalism, tends to start to exclude others and draw distinction in some cases where there isn't. I think it's powerful that you're an immigrant to this country and you said you weren't sure if you could really participate in this. The fact that you would come to a forum and engage, as Dr. Lowe said, democracy is not a spectator sport. And so it's fantastic that you would come and engage. You don't even need the right of citizenship in this country to engage in our political process. In fact, go back to the very first question, the kind of immigration and our history has not always been a proud one, but we do figure it out. And as you said, sometimes it works itself out. I think the challenge is that in some of the challenges we're facing today, the price being paid by certain communities in this country are extremely high for this kind of division. So I'm not patient enough to wait till some future when we kind of work through all this stuff. There's a lot of prices being paid by a lot of people right now, and I think we owe it to ourselves as as a country and as a community to really think about who is bearing what burdens when this kind of divisiveness is fueled, because the burdens fall unequally. And I'm very conscious as someone born in this country, as a man, as a white man to boot, and a WASP on top of that, I don't bear the same burdens that a lot of other people bear when this kind of mudslinging goes on. And so I'm just very conscious that the burdens are unequal, and therefore we kind of have to rally together to make sure that we don't have to wait too long to work these kind of divisions out. So I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight, and it is, thank you. It may be that your father had to sue us to allow people to come here, but as you are a proud grad of the University of Virginia, I want to make you an honorary Terp here tonight to show that we can even have peace between Virginians and Marylanders. And Professor Duke has a small gift for...
A token of our appreciation
Thank you.
for a wonderful evening. Thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you, Professor Duke. Thank you. Thank you.
And I just want to thank the Brody family for being here tonight. I do think, Bill and Sherry, your mother would like to see the kind of conversation we're having. So thank you for bringing the whole family here tonight. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Well, this is nice.